and trade. See you later. Safe travels. Have a good one.
Trying to find that interview I was listening to, yeah. But that's not it.
What's happening, Game Outsiders? I've got a special bonus episode for you. I had a chance to sit down and talk with Doc Mack, the owner of Galloping Ghost Arcade in Brookfield, Illinois, which happens to be the world's largest video game arcade. Joining us is filmmaker Craig Bass, who happens to be working on a documentary called Ghost Lord and the Quest for Dark Presence. And it's all about a video game that Doc has been working on for 28 years. I got a chance to talk to both of them about the film, and it was an awesome conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you'll support them on Kickstarter as well, because this film looks awesome. This is the Gaming Outsider. Greetings, programs, and welcome to the Gaming Outsider, a video game podcast with a focus on our incredible community. We got a very special treat for you today. This is not our normal, typical episode. CB's not here, Zach's not here, Alyssa's not here, but we've got a couple fantastic guests that I'm very excited to introduce you to. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the show two people that I just met for the first time virtually. First off, filmmaker Craig Bass, and also the owner of Galloping Ghost Arcade in Chicago, Illinois, Doc Mack. Craig and Doc, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I am so excited because a mutual friend of ours, Rob, reached out to me and told me about this film that you're doing, Craig, called Ghost Lord and the Quest for Dark Presence, which, just from watching the Kickstarter trailer, I feel like I learned so much about you, Doc, and about what you did, and just that little snippet that I got to see makes me very eager and excited to hear your story, because I had no idea there was all this behind the stuff, backstory about how you got to where you are and how you started the arcade. So, Craig, can you kind of give my audience an idea of what they can expect when this film comes out? What kind of a story? I don't even want to give too much away because you wanted to watch the movie, but give me the elevator pitch.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to put it is, join the owner of the largest arcade in the world, Doc Mack, and his 28-year quest to create the video game Dark Presence, which he believes will supercharge a struggling industry. I think it's something like that is what we typed up. But I found out that Doc had been working on his own game for what is now 28 years in the making, still going, and was just very curious to know why it was taking so long. And I found out that it had been produced in Brookfield, which is where the arcade is, which is outside of the city. It's not a place that you would assume people are making games, certainly not live action 2D digitized games. So when I found this out, it was very much like, well, I need to know what the story is. I'm sort of always on the lookout for stories, as somebody whose profession is very much a storyteller. And went and met Doc and took it from there. But it's really the story of this 16, 17-year-old kid that wants to do what they love to do. And I related to that a lot because I've always made films. I love film. Okay, well, that's what I should do. Started making movies when I was like 6 with my cats in a VHS camcorder. Graduated at 10 to roping my best friends in and making kung fu movies with a VHS camcorder. And things just kind of went from there. So I think I saw a lot of similarities in certain ways at the beginning. It's just that idea of taking what you love or what speaks to you in life and making a lifestyle of it. When met Doc and needed to hear more about the story. So it's his quest to create this thing, which is still ongoing. And in the process, he of course made the largest arcade in the world, which is a story unto itself that is encased within this larger story of Ghost Lord's quest. And yeah, I think a lot of people were already interested in that. How did the arcade start? How has it become so successful? And it is a chapter within a larger story that most people aren't even aware of.
Gotcha. I'm very intrigued by it, and I love that you both have that ambitious personality. Doc, I want to ask you. Craig is talking about how ambitious you were at such a young age. What is it about video games that made you want to just revolve your life around this crazy hobby that we love so much?
it was just from such a young age. It was just the main interest of my life. So it just was like a natural thing of like, I love playing games. I started with Pong and Asteroids in the arcade, and it was just, there was nothing else that I wanted to do more. It was just kind of always the target goal. And back when I was 6, 7 years old, I had no idea how I was going to get there, but it didn't take long before I was talking to industry people, and even at a very young age, it was just kind of, it just made sense. Like, you just got to be around it and immerse yourself and go towards where you want to go.
That's awesome, man. I'm a little jealous because when I was younger, when I was 16, 17, like Craig was talking about, I feel like gaming wasn't, I mean, probably for you either, but it wasn't cool. I feel like I had a lot of pushback from friends and family about, like, why do you love this thing so much? You know, this is nothing that's going to be a career thing for you. This is silly. You know, can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how did you get over that hurdle at a young age with people that look at video games as being like something for kids or something that's not going to be long term?
I was painfully shy and extremely antisocial. So I didn't have anybody around me telling me, like, oh, that's stupid, I didn't have any of that negative. My parents were very supportive. They were just like, whatever makes you happy, just go do whatever you want. And it kind of went all throughout. Anytime there was when I did hear somebody that was like, oh, you can't do that, that's not going to happen. That was just kind of this like motivating factor of there was such a turning point when at this point I was 17, 18 years old, and I got a chance meeting with Ed Boon. I was working at a gaming store, Babbage's, and again, painfully shy. It was so difficult to go up to him. Like, he just walked in the store, he's just shopping.
Yeah.
And I was like, when am I going to have this opportunity? I've got to go talk to him. Like, maybe I'm going to go work at Midway, and I've got all these game ideas. And went up to him and was like, oh, huge fan, and I've got all these game ideas. How can I come work at Midway and work with you? And his answer of like, it's so hard to get in. Everybody wants to make video games. That's the dream of every kid.
Right.
And he's like, it's hard. You don't know anybody. It's hard to get in. And I was like, we're standing here together. I know you. Come on, like, bring me in here. And I left the whole thing being like, well, if I can't get in that way, I'm just do it myself. And that really started learning, and I had already started the process, but it was all about just learning everything that it would take to make a video game. And the internet wasn't what it is now. It was like it was a million times harder back then. And no starting place to really go get information from. So it was just kind of, what's everybody else doing, from looking through the fence and seeing how things are done, and just kind of guessed our way through everything.
Yeah, kudos to you for shooting your shot. I'm sorry it didn't pan out the way you wanted to, but
for me, it was, I owe Ed Boon so much, because like there was a time where it was like, oh, that Ed Boon, I'll show him, and it has gone so full circle, because like, I can't get up early enough and come into work and do all the things I love doing, and that was so the domino tipping over of what I'm going to do was that conversation. So it's anytime, like, you hear people that don't take the negative things and ever reflect back on is how beneficial they are to have happened. So I owe Ed Boon so much. One of my favorite people.
That's awesome. Have you had a chance to meet him since then, since you've kind of established yourself?
Yeah, it's with the arcade. It's kind of brought this great normalizing point between so many of the industry people, because obviously if you're at one developer, you're competing against everybody, but the arcade kind of is that level playing field that everybody, no matter what company they're working for, can go to, and everybody's got games there. So we talk with D.G. Jarvis, George Petro, Ed Boon. Everybody in the gaming scene can come out to the arcade and kind of reminisce on all the games that they had created. And while we all have our own projects and everything, it's not as... It's created this very unique thing as opposed to how it was back in the day when everything was so... You're at that company, I'm at this company. So Ed has been so amazing. We've got to, with the arcade, do custom cabinets for games like Injustice, and we work very closely with them, and we go out there and service their arcade machines and stuff. And it's been amazing to get to like Injustice. Ed has been so amazing. We've got to, with the arcade, do custom cabinets for games like Injustice, and we work very closely with them, and we go out there and service their arcade machines and stuff. And it's been amazing to get to just grow friendships with so many industry people that have made all the games that everybody loves after all these decades.
That's awesome. And I know you've heard this a million times, but kudos on what you've done, man, with all this time. For anybody out listening, if you have not been to Galloping Ghost, you need to get out there. Craig mentioned it's the largest in the world. It will blow your mind how large this place is. And from what Doc says, they're in the middle of an expansion right now, so it's getting even larger. If there's a video game cabinet that you're familiar with, it's probably there. it's crazy. So kudos to you, man. I love your arcade. Craig, I want to go to you for just a second and talk a little bit about the documentary again, Ghost Lord and the Quest for Dark Presence. You told a little bit of story about how you got interested in it, and I don't know how much. I don't want to obviously give away everything that's in here, but can you give everybody an idea of like who were you interviewing and how far back were we going? Because I'm super intrigued to see it, and I can't wait, but I want our listeners to be excited.
Yeah, I mean, just as I must have been taking on a bit of Doc's sort of obsessive collector nature, because we've already done about 50 interviews, and we're going back as far as we can, right? So I approach this from a very completionist perspective, which again, I think complements the sensibilities of my subject. You know, one thing that hasn't been addressed, but I think is interesting. Well, you can kind of see just looking at Doc's stream, you can see a bunch of guitars in the background. I mean, that's one of many collections that he has. The arcade probably being truly the apotheosis of his collector's nature, which, you know, in a lot of senses, that arcade and all those games are really an extension of, that's his collection. You know, it's his museum mostly. So, I don't know, apparently I've inherited some of that because we've talked to so many people, and, you know, ultimately there was at least 15 people involved in the game. One thing we haven't talked about is this was refilmed. You know, this is in the style of the original Mortal Kombat game. So it's real people filmed on green screens, green screen dropped out, put the digital backgrounds in, and now you're these characters. And Doc had filmed it when he was young, very young. As he said, there wasn't internet or anything like that, so they just kind of had to fumble through the best of their ability, which is phenomenal what they did. It is amazing what they accomplished with minimal guidance. And then had to go back and refill because there were a lot of, it just wasn't right. Like that was it kind of became the test run. And I think the refilm happened, Doc, about a year after the first filming?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
Starting in '94 and then shot again in like sometime in '95, I believe.
Yeah. But there's this whole period which we'll address in the film of about a decade where they're hitting a lot of hurdles and they're trying to get this game done. And after about a decade, Doc realizes everything was dated. Like HD's become the norm. They had shot an SD. They really weren't going to be able to bring it to market and have it compete. So he had to decide, was he going to abandon this game that had been the centerpiece of his life for 12 years or whatever at this point? Or was he going to reboot it and review the whole thing? And he decided we're going to review the whole thing. Not only that, he said, you know, we were almost done with it, which they were. You know, it was almost programmed, ready to ship. We got so close. Sure, let's do it. So when they went back to film for the third time, they filmed not only Dark Presence, but Conquering Light. Conquering Light being the sequel to Dark Presence, and involving something like 15 more characters, you know, new characters. So this final filming became a 4-year process. You know, taking everything they had learned, implementing it, involving all sorts of new people, and generating new ideas. So there are so many people involved in this that it's required us to turn over as many stones as possible. Because just between the 3 filmings, you've got probably 20 actors, you know, 20 performers. You've got, you know, trying to talk to friends and family of docs. You've got people, you know, there's probably 4, 5, 6 people working on the game currently. You got people that used to work on the game. You got people that are instrumental with the arcade. And then the ecosystem Doc's created involves a lot of these people you're, you know, sort of referencing as like these classic gaming worlds. Like Doc kind of, you know, one of his missions, and I can say this is his unofficial biographer, has been to grab a lot of these creators who really weren't as celebrated as they should have been when they were turning out their greatest work, and bringing them into the spotlight now. So it was meeting people like Jeff Lee, who designed Hubert, Brian Cole, the creator of Rampage, and saying, we need to bring these guys out. If people need to realize these were the guys, these are the guys that did it. So he's become very close to these people, but become very close to the original cast of Mortal Kombat, and help promote them and their achievements. So all of these people then have become characters in the story. You know, so we've got these guys. We've got most of the, you know, a large chunk of the original MK. We've got Eugene Jarvis, George Petro, some of the guys that were really heavy hitters during the heyday of arcade. It's just an immense amount of people. And the story, I mean, I took the story all the way back to birth, basically. You know, let's, Doc and I talked. So we've been working on this for almost 2 years, but for at least a year, probably longer, Doc and I would meet 1 to 2 times a week. And I essentially generated what I thought would be a structure to this piece. It was like 500 and something pages of notes. So, of course, this won't all be included. It doesn't need to be, but it's sort of like when you write a story and you have a protagonist, you should know where that protagonist went to school in 4th grade and how that influenced them. That may never make it into the film, but you know this because you need the most 3-dimensional picture possible of whoever's story you're trying to tell. So there is definitely, I'll talk to some people, you know, in the industry and whatnot, and they'll be like, why do you have that many interviews? Like, why do you have 35 hours of interview footage with Doc himself? You know, what's wrong with you? Do you not know the story you want to tell? It's not that. It's just, I'd rather have it all. I'd rather have the full marble and then chisel out the statue from that instead of trying to pick up the scraps or the pieces and wedge them together.
Yeah, get the hard stuff out of the way and then piecing it together is the fun part, right?
Yeah, well, we have about 150 hours of footage already, so and we sort of work on it all the time. So it's no, it is fun. It's cool to pull the story out. It can become challenging to decide like what's necessary and what kind of stay off the side on the chopping block. But there's a lot.
Now, I I've interviewed some other filmmakers like Jeremy Sneed, who's clearly a gamer. He's the guy with video games, the movie. Are you a gamer yourself? Is this something that you're into, or is this kind of a new world?
I wouldn't say it's new. I grew up loving games and playing games religiously. I mean, Doc and I are pretty much very similar ages, so played a lot of the same sorts of games. I was 10 when Mortal Kombat came out, so that was, I mean, it left an indelible mark on my psyche. I would say that I absolutely grew up a gamer. Do I play games as often now? Because I'm making this damn movie, so I don't really have the opportunity to do it. But I would say the same. I mean, Doc, what about you? You know, compared to how much you used to play games, what is it? What is that like for you now, and why?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. It used to be 8-10 hours a day, or often more, and I play every day, but certainly not as much as I used to. And it's just because there's so many things going on, and fixing machines and the other businesses, and it's grown to the point where like the playing and finishing games, I still love doing it, but it's become so important to make sure that the games are playable for everybody else, the other players, and even the industry people. There's something so amazing seeing somebody play, a family come in and play a game like Rampage, take a picture of it and send it over to Jeff Nauman and Brian Cullen, the designer, programmer, and artist, and let them see, like, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year, people are enjoying this game that they made decades ago. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter that it's not the newest title out there, or visually the most cutting-edge graphics. It's an amazing game that's really stood the test of time. And to be able to showcase that to the people that made all these games that set me down that path of wanting to make games, it's an amazing thing. It's very gratifying to be able to show how much appreciation for what they created so long ago still exists.
Mm-hmm. And forgive me if this is a spoilery question, because I don't know if this is something that you want to reveal in the documentary or not, but there's somebody in the trailer that straight up says this game's never coming out. And like, I mean, is it, or is that?
Like, it's, and this is exactly what the documentary that Craig's working on is going to explain. And it's like, we've had industry people that are like, there's no reason why a game would take this long. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if it was a normal situation, you're like, sure. But the time that we did that and everything else that is kind of spilled over from it is, it's a crazy story. Like, when Craig came in and was like, why is this taking so long? Explain it to me. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, so have a seat. And it was hours. just kind of getting through the elevator pitch of what went on with this, because even at the rebooting point, we filmed virtually 7 days a week for close to 4 years, because there's so much to film, and we had, again, there's so many hurdles to it. People get hurt, and every little thing that you could imagine happened was happening. So once we got out, we're setting up, and post-production's going great, and then it's like the opportunity of opening the arcade happened. And that was a big 7-year hiatus, because everybody that was working on the game had to shift to working in the arcade. So you've got artists and programmers and sound engineers now working at counter, bringing people in, and it's been the opportunities that have kind of spawned from working on the game. We didn't want to pass up any of the opportunities, but it's slowed the journey to the final destination.
Right.
And just like Craig, people asking like, well, why do you need 50 interviews? Are you going to use all this? Like we heard all of that along the way. Like not only with the game, I remember we had it was George Gomez and Steve Ritchie and George Petro and all these the heavy hitters of from the Midway days are out at the arcade helping us shoot a promo video, and we're giving them this behind-the-scenes look at Dark Presence, and they're like, "What are you doing? Like, why do you need 117,000 frames of animation for this game? I don't understand." And it's kind of the framework of what everybody has seen. Like, we don't want to just do what everybody's seen. We're trying to innovate and bring new things to it. And just like with what Craig's doing, I've been amazed at the lengths that he's gone to track down people that I haven't talked to in 30 years. And he's taken these hundreds of hours of like all the data that he's collected. He's asked so many great questions and taken it to different paths, and it's brought up stuff that I hadn't thought about in forever, which has just made it such an amazing experience for us to be a part of it. And again, I can't thank Craig and his team enough for thinking that it's a worthwhile story.
Sure.
It's been like, who gets that opportunity? Like, we're just doing what we're doing, and not really, we know what we want to do, and we don't have a set time frame of when anything has to get done.
Right.
But all along the way, we're taking notes of who's saying, like, oh, this isn't going to work. And Masi Segopian was the guy who in the trailer said, it's never happening. And it's like, okay, well, we'll make time to let Masi know that this is done. And we can't wait. There's a lot of, we listen to all of it. And like there's a lot of, we enjoy the naysayers, because just like when the arcade opened, we had so many people saying like, oh, it's really cool, but an arcade in 2010, you got 6 months at best. I'll come and enjoy it for the 6 months that you're open, but when you close, it's going to be hard to watch another arcade close.
Right.
And it's just kind of like, think what you want. Like, when you're coming, we've been open going on 13 years, so we're in no rush to prove our points.
Right.
But it'll be nice to be able to have the game done and let those people step up and play the game and enjoy it, hopefully.
Well, kudos on the perseverance, man. I'm excited to see everything come to fruition for you. I should have asked this at the top of the show, because I was coming into this interview, after watching the trailer, but people listening may not have seen it yet. Can you explain what Dark Presence is? Like I know, but I want our listeners to hear from you.
So, do the trailer, or do you want to give the...
No, I think
the game is...
I think he's asking the...
Yeah, the game. Sorry.
So the game,
Yeah.
Yeah.
is a 2D one-on-one fighting game. It's got a very robust story to it. Just like Craig was saying, we had laid everything out for all the characters and had this just thousands of pages of backstory. And the game itself was really an inspiration from the Mortal Kombat games and fighting games. And we didn't want to just make a clone fighting game, something that plays like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. Along the way, it was always just kind of a collection of ideas that we always wanted to see in a fighting game. So, like playing Street Fighter, like you'd see Guile with a tattoo on both arms, or you'd see Vega when they switched sides, his claw would switch hands. And it's even that little minute details, like nobody cares, but what if you didn't have to do that? And so we're like, okay, we're going to have separate film left and right sides. So our characters don't have to be symmetrical. We can do whatever we want with our character design. And it's a real niche thing to kind of worry about that stuff. But it's turned into where it affected gameplay so much, because now you have different stances and you're instantly doubling the size of the game by not mirroring the images, but it added this whole unique level to the gameplay. And it's just been ideas like that it's kept it growing and making it not just like some quickly produced indie game. It's I'd put it against anything out there. Like we have pro players that we used to have a pro Mortal Kombat fighting team called Team GGA that we would send all over the world to go compete in tournaments. And they're playing Dark Presence, and you watch these guys that are going out to Evo and Combo Breaker and Frosty Faustins and these amazing tournaments, and they're enjoying the game on a level like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. And it's like, we've got something that can compete with those games, which we're just excited to get it done and out there and see the consensus of what everybody thinks of it.
I'm excited as well. Where's this being developed? Is it being developed for arcades? Is it being developed for modern consoles, retro consoles? Like, where are we looking at this?
We're going to launch on an arcade platform, which obviously, when we were designing it, was always for arcade. And the whole industry has shifted to console, and so much more money to be made in console. But we want to kind of help rejuvenate the arcade scene. We feel that is by providing content that's exclusive to the arcades, much like it was back when the arcades were king. They had the best hardware. Instead of designing a game that easily fits on console, we designed it like they did back in the day. Maybe we have to make hardware, we're not confined to anything. We're just making the game that we want to make. And that has, in itself, become so great to not have those constraints. Eventually we'll do a port to PlayStation 5 and a Steam release, but we want to give it probably about 8 months to a year exclusive time in the arcades, just to help arcades have something that's unique to them, that'll draw people in.
Yeah, I've noticed you could be spark for a resurgence in newer arcade machines, man. That'd be awesome.
That was the goal, and kind of the start of it all, because we were working on the game, and there's a company called Warcade, which was a location tracker. And we looked at it and we're like, oh, this is going to be great because we can see what arcades have what games, and we can use it. So we started driving around. We hit up about 80 venues that had arcade games. And it really showcased us the state of the arcade scene, because we couldn't find a working Mortal Kombat 2, 1 or 2 in the Chicagoland area.
What, really?
We could find them, but they weren't playing properly, and that kind of went into this whole thing of we tried to help arcades by offering to fix them at no charge. And we didn't have any takers on that. So it's like, wow, this industry that we're trying to produce a game for is in a rough spot. So when the arcade, with the opportunity to open the arcade, it was like, oh, hey, if we can showcase that arcades are a viable business model, maybe that'll help other arcades open. And the thought was like, instead of just putting out a game into this scene that's kind of on the downside of it, but the decline, will help rebuild the foundation. Because we need arcade venues to sell to.
Right.
So we opened up the Galpy Ghost Arcade, and since then we've helped about 40 arcades open worldwide. We've proved that you don't need alcohol or redemption games, or you don't need anything else. You can just have arcade games to make it a successful business model. And it's been great seeing more arcades open up, and every time new places open, it's like, hey, it seems better, and that can only help Dark Presence have more places to be out there and for people to get a chance to play it.
Oh man, that's so cool to hear. Because there's just something about being in an arcade. You know, just the smell of the electricity and the dust and all that kind of stuff. Intermingling brings back memories of Aladdin's Castle when I was a kid. And I love that you were trying to keep that alive instead of just being relying on consoles and PC and that kind of thing. Because I would love to see this whole thing blow up. And to see people making stuff just for artists, to see the dust and
It's been great seeing more arcades open up, and every time new places open, it's like, hey, the scene's better, and that can only help Dark Presence have more places to be out there and for people to get a chance to play it.
Oh man, that's so cool to hear. Because there's just something about being in an arcade. You know, just the smell of the electricity and the dust and all that kind of stuff. Just intermingling brings back memories of Aladdin's Castle when I was a kid. And I love that you were trying to keep that alive instead of just being relying on consoles and PC and that kind of thing. Because I would love to see this whole thing blow up. And to see people making stuff just for arcades to start out with, and then hey, we can get a port of it later, like we did back in the '90s, right? You know,
that's what it's all about. And talking with all the like every time I talk to any of the industry, obviously, Play Mechanics and Raw Thrills, they're still the kings of the arcade. But anybody I talk to from other companies, it's always like, hey, look, this is a viable platform. Like. I talk to anybody from NetherRealm Studios, and it's always like, you can put out an arcade version, people will buy it. It's got a market.
I wonder how that would go over with. I hate to use this phrase, but with like the Karens of the world that are going to be upset about something like Mortal Kombat being in a newer arcade. You know what I mean?
It's with the games that are on console now. I don't really think that it's not really, it doesn't seem to be an issue. Like we don't really have parents coming in questioning the content of what's in the arcade games. I think there's a lot of concerns that aren't really there, and even stemming from arcades themselves. Like when we talk to towns about opening an arcade, there's so many laws on the books that keep arcades from opening. And people are worried about crime and loitering problems and gang activity, and it's stuff from 30 years ago, like from the 80s, longer than that, 40 years ago, that it's this reputation that the scene had at its absolute worst when there was no good communication. You'd hear these one or two little incidents that would make worldwide news, and then that's all anybody thought about. But it was never really that bad. So it's like, we had so many towns that we approached when we were opening the arcade that were like, oh, we don't want an arcade in our town. We don't want the crime. And after we opened, yeah. after we opened, those same towns came back and were like, hey, we see that it's a successful business and you're bringing in people from all over the world. That's great for tourism. And would you want to move to our town? And it's like, yeah, we're quite happy here in Brookfield.
Yeah.
But it's all about getting that information out there and dispelling the people that have those concerns. Concerns are great, but if you're able to show them how it really is. And we talk about Mortal Kombat. We run an event called Combat Con. And we had 500 players travel in from all over the world. Germany and Chile and anywhere you can think of, players traveled in. And it's this violent video game that changed. You had to have a rating system because everybody is going to become a violent maniac from playing Mortal Kombat. And to have so many people come in from all over the world, every ethnic background and every religion, and none of it mattered. You couldn't see 500 people get along better over a violent video game.
Right.
It's an amazing thing. If you look at what people have said about violent video games, and you'd think if you...
That link is in the show notes too, so they can actually, if you're hearing this episode, you can click on it and you can see the trailer that we've been talking about. This film looks awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we will be, we're diligently working on it every day. You know, lately it's been a lot of work on the Kickstarter to try to get that next round of funding together so we can finish this off. But we're in editing every day, logging stuff, detailing things, putting together pieces of the story. We shot 2 interviews last week, so we're still in production. I would hope to see a finished film within the year.
Oh, cool.
That would be my goal. It's a lot of material, and there's still some path to walk, but we're diligently working on it all the time. We want to get it out there. We want to get the story out to the world. So I would very much hope within about a year we will have a finished product.
Very cool. And outside of the comical lines from the trailer, my favorite thing in there is when you are actually looking at the camera and you say, look, this thing's going to be made no matter what, but with your help, we can make it even better. I've never seen that delivery. You saying that, yeah. I just thought it was a very earnest and just real thing to say. Like, I loved it.
Seeing so many video game documentaries that are out there and the amount of effort that Craig and his team have already put in, it's unbelievable. Like the amount of equipment that he's brought in, the quality of stuff that he shot is just mind-blowing. And hearing the ideas of what else he wants to add and how he's trying to bring the rest of the story to life, it's incredible. So we've had so many documentaries shot at the arcade and trying to tell the story of how the arcade came to be. And without any question, this is so much bigger and better than anything that's ever been shot. So it's been amazing watching him pull it all together and watching what he's put into it. And we started the same way with the game. It was all out of pocket, and it's an expensive thing. He's flying people in and getting all the information from everybody. It's an incredible thing. So I'm so amazed and impressed at where he's at already with it, and watching the trailer, and I can't wait to see what else he does with it.
Very cool. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to stop by. Again, the film is going to be called Ghost Lord and the Quest for Dark Presence. I'm asking everybody listening, if any of this sounds intriguing, please check out the Kickstarter, support it, because this sounds like just an incredible thing. And I can't wait to come down to Galloping Ghost again in the near future. It's been too long, so I'm looking forward.
Looking forward to having you out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be sure to track you down so I can shake your hand.
Awesome.
Well, Craig Bass and Doc Mack, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Good luck, and I wish you guys all the best. And like I said, just thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate it.
we'll catch you guys later. For everybody out there listening, thanks you so much for checking out this special episode. Reminder: you can check out our website, thegamingoutsider.com, for all of our episodes and all of our written reviews as well. And there will be an article up on this very project too, so keep an eye out for that. But I want to remind you before we head out here one more time: there is no such thing as a bad game, just games that aren't for you. Just games that aren't for you. There's no such thing as a bad game, just games that aren't for you.
Hey guys, I just wanted to clarify one thing. What you'll see next was my first interview done on camera. Well, it wasn't my first ever interview in English, but before I was doing all communication by emails or chats. So, as you can imagine, I was really nervous when I was doing this one. And that's why I'm so grateful that David agreed on this interview, despite my lack of experience. It was a great pleasure for me to talk with him. David shared some interesting facts about his games and studios where he worked in the past. And I believe it was a very insightful discussion overall. So I hope you will learn new things from it as well. Enjoy. Before we start, I want to introduce you to our viewers. Today I'm going to talk with David Crane, one of the most successful game designers in the history of gaming industry. He's the creator of highly influential titles such as Pitfall, Little Computer People, and dozens of other games. David is also one of the co-founders of Activision, which has become one of the biggest gaming publishers in the world. Now, David, as I briefly explained to you in my email to you, I'm currently working on a documentary series that aims to give a feel of the early days of the computer gaming industry to the viewer. So my first question is going to be about the 70s. Can you tell me how you got introduced to computers and programming, and what was your first microcomputer?
Well, I was, of course, interested in gaming when I was a young child, but there were no computer games back then. But I learned game theory and game logic and how to make rules for games and that sort of thing. So I had a background in gaming. I got an engineering degree and learned all about computers and video and television theory, which back then it helped to know how a television works to do games for early machines. So I had a plan that I would probably start making products, gadgets for the home. And I went to work for a semiconductor company, National Semiconductor. I'm also a tennis player. I was playing tournament level tennis, and I moved to an apartment building that had tennis courts and met Alan Miller. Alan Miller became one of my co-founders at Activision, but at the time he was just my doubles partner. And one night he came to me with an ad that he had written. He was working at Atari, and Atari wanted to hire more video game makers for their Atari 2600, which had just come out. And he said, "Here, read this ad and tell me if it works, if it has any, typographical errors or whatever." And I read the ad, and it was a nice ad, and I said, "In fact, I'm interested in a job like this." So that was about 8 p.m. one night. I went back into National Semiconductor, where I had built a computer based around National's microprocessor in order to help with my work. We didn't have computers on every desk. I had to build a computer from scratch. And I used it as a word processor to write up a resume. And went in for an interview at 10 a.m. the next day and got a phone call at 2 p.m. That I was offered a job. And I gave my 2-week notice. So in less than 24 hours, from playing tennis with Alan Miller and reading his ad, I was hired by Atari.
Can you describe the process of designing a video game in times when the industry didn't have established rules and develop? Development practices?
Designing a game for the Atari 2600 was a very technical process. Some people know that the Atari 2600, it follows the scan of the television, and it changes pixels as they're changing on the television. Rather than having a whole bitmap, you're actually drawing the screen in real time. And I mean, that's ridiculous by today's standards, but that's the way it was back then. So the people who did it, all of the people around me, had to be very capable with highly technical details. But if you're making a game, it also has to be fun. It has to be artistically appealing. So there were both sides of the equation. You had both left brain and right brain, as they say, skills in one person. Because an Atari 2600 game was made by one person. One person thought of the idea, drew all of the art, made every line of program, every pixel of art, sound effects, the music if there is any. All of that was done by a single person. And so each one of us was sitting at a desk. We did have access to a PDP-11 computer. The home computers were not yet available, but the engineering types of computers, such as the PDP-11, were available. And they had made a tiny one. It's called a PDP-11, and it was not much bigger than a PC of today. So each one of us had one of those, and then we had a device called a development system. That was a hardware device that simulated the Atari 2600. It really simulated the ROM of the Atari 2600 and attached to a 2600. So if you think about it, what we would do is we would download code into this device, and it would present that code to the 2600 as if someone had just plugged in a cartridge. But it was RAM instead of ROM, so we were able to modify it every few minutes and work our way toward making a game. So video game design on the Atari 2600 back then was one man, needed both left and right brain skills, some special hardware that allowed us to connect to the Atari 2600, and then on top of that, 1,000 or 2,000 hours of work.
Okay, let's talk about your job in Atari. It was your first job in the gaming industry, but you didn't stay here for long because of how they treated you and other designers. Was it just an Atari or an issue with royalties, or giving a credit to creators was a common issue in the industry back then?
Well, back then, there was no credit given to the designers. And it became pretty clear that the creative products that we were making were roughly equivalent to writing a novel. They were about the same amount of work. They required the same amount of creativity. And if you look at publishing in the book industry, the designer, or the writer in this case, would get credit. In fact, as the writer became more and more successful, their name on the book became bigger and bigger until sometimes it was bigger than the title, like Stephen King, right?
Yeah.
So it turns out that there were 4 of us at Atari who were responsible for all of Atari's hits, or most of them at least. And one year, our games made Atari $60 million, and we were making $20,000 salaries. So we went to the president of Atari and said, obviously people like what we do, we're good at what we do, and you've got us making these paltry salaries, and you need to do something about that. Whether it's a royalty or bonuses or credit or something had to be done. And they were not interested in that. This was the big corporation of Warner Communications who had taken over Atari. And we were told, no, it's an Atari product. It's not a product by David Crane, so your name is not going to be on it. And there are other people involved. You're no more important than anyone else, including the people on the assembly line who put it together.
Before we talk about Activision, can you tell me more about Atari 8-bit computers? If I'm not mistaken, they were made in a separate department, but you got involved in this project because of your hardware design background, right?
Somewhat, yes. I mean, Atari had 2 main departments, which is the one making arcade games and the one making home games. But they did want to come out with a computer that competed with the Apple II. So they started making the Atari 800 computer system. And what's actually interesting about that project is Atari management was trying to make a business computer. IBM had their PC out, and the first IBM PC cost $20,000. So they wanted to compete with that. So they really weren't looking at the Apple II market, because the Apple II really didn't end up in the business very much. But the engineering departments said, no, Atari, we are a game company. We shouldn't be making a business computer. So without telling management the engineers, every decision they made was, how do we make this better for gaming? Sure, you want to balance your checkbook, you can do that. You want to run a word processor, you can do that. But let's make it better for gaming so that it can be the next great video game console. So it was kind of, strange. They thought they were going to get a business computer, but we were building a gaming console. And it was done in the same division, main division, as the gaming division, but kind of on the side, like we say. And we ended up having to throw the entire company at it to try to get it out to market, which included all of us who were making successful games stopped working on games, which was stupid, and helped make the operating system for the Atari 800. But in doing that, we made the operating system be more helpful to making games than doing business software. So yes, I had a hardware background, so I was involved in that. Didn't have to do a lot of the engineering. But whenever you understand the hardware, you can make the software much better. And for 9 or 10 months, those of us who should have been making new games were busy doing that, helping to make the operating system for the Atari 800.
At some point, you decided that you had enough and left Atari with Alan Miller, Bob Whitehead, and Larry Kaplan. But you couldn't have done it without the investment that was provided by Tim Levy, and who became the first CEO of the company. Was it you were trying to build something like anti-Atari, as I understand it right?
Well, yeah, when the president of Atari told us that we were no more important to him than the person on the assembly line putting the games together, we knew there was no future for us at Atari. So at that point, the four of us, we all ate lunch together, we kind of hung around together, helped each other with our games. We were a small group of four. And we said, all right, we're leaving. Now what are we going to do? The easiest thing to do would be to go across the street and open an office and make games and sell them through Atari. Just use Atari as a publisher. Then we could charge consulting rates when they needed us to do something else in the Atari 800 or whatever. So it would have been a fine little consulting business. And we would have used Atari as a publisher. Al Miller, on the other hand, says no reason to do that. We can do everything Atari is doing. So there were two schools of thought. We can do this, it's really easy, or we can do that, it's really hard. And we tried to figure out how to decide which was the way to go. So we contacted an attorney at one of the biggest law firms in the area and went in and said, what we really need to know right now is, do we form a partnership or do we form a corporation? And he said, well, that's...
One second, let me read this. I can tell him about it. Always interesting.
Be careful. See you around. Safe travels.
Very simply answered, you form a partnership if you're just going to do this consulting group, and you form a corporation if you're going to create a publishing company. But then he said, and if you're going to do that, I have a personal friend who has been trying to start a software company for the last year and has an investor ready to invest if he can come up with a good business. And that was Jim Levy. So through that attorney, we met with Jim Levy and spent a couple months working out whether we liked working together, working out a business plan, and we ended up with a business plan that he took to the venture capital company and got funded. So Activision, yes, Activision required funding in order to become a big publisher, but it wasn't necessarily the direction we're going to go. In hindsight, of course, it was a good decision.
Soon after you founded Activision, Atari tried to sue you for appropriating their trade secrets. After reading about this ridiculous episode, I was surprised that they didn't try to somehow prevent you from producing cartridges for their console. So I wanted to clarify, were you still required to get Atari's approval to release games on Atari 2600? And weren't you needed dev kits to test and develop games for this console?
We knew when we left that Atari would be trying to sue us out of business. It's typically done when there's a spin-off. A small company spins off from a larger company. And we were very carefully advised by attorneys that we leave there with nothing but the shirts on our backs. And in the intellectual property industry, the company you work for doesn't own your ability, even if you develop that ability while working for them. It's in your brain and it belongs to you. So as long as we didn't take anything from the company, we were not doing anything wrong. So in our initial budget, we told the venture capital company, we're going to be sued, so make sure that there's enough money in there to defend the lawsuit. So there was no doubt that we were going to be sued. There was nothing that we did wrong. We were very carefully, viewed the law, and there was nothing we did wrong. So, in order to make a game for the Atari 2600, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's a complicated technical process, but they sell Atari 2600s, in stores. You go and you buy a store, and you buy a console from the store, and you open it up. And I reverse engineered it, found all the hardware, all the software connections, and that sort of thing, so that I generated all the information that we would need, rather than taking that information from Atari, which is what they thought we did. So the combination of being prepared to be sued, exiting correctly, and doing the full reverse engineering was the thing that made it possible so that we could continue to do our jobs, to do what we do best.
Yeah, it's just, it's just hard to imagine something like that to happen nowadays, because platform holders these days are very adamant in controlling what is allowed to be released and sold on their hardware. So I've noticed that at first Activision was almost exclusively focused on producing console games. For example, Pitfall was ported on computers almost 2 years after the release on Atari 2600. Is there any particular reason why you've ignored the home computer market before the video game crash in 1983?
It was actually very simple. We were the first third-party publishers of video game cartridges for those consoles. Nowadays, everyone is a third-party publisher. Activision, Blizzard, Electronic Arts, almost everybody is not associated with the same company that manufactures hardware. So that's why we call it a third-party publisher. But we still had to have enough consoles in the homes in order for there to be a market for our games. So we ran some numbers, and we figured that once the number of consoles reached 1 million in the homes, we would do games for it. Now, when we started Activision, there were 6 million Atari 2600s. So that was the best place for us to put our resources. Then the Intellivision topped over 100,000, or no, I think it was 100,000. Did I say 1 million? I'm not sure. No, I think it was 1 million. Yes, the Atari television topped that number, and so we decided to do games for that. Now that wasn't easy because I had to go back and reverse engineer the television and build a development system and all those things. I ended up doing all those things for the company in the early years. A new console comes out every couple of years. So if you are a third-party publisher, you watch these consoles come out, you wait for them to sell enough units so that you can care about them, and then you have to start making games for them. And again, that requires reverse engineering, it requires making development systems, and it goes much farther into software solutions. Most of the games have compressed data on the ROM, and you have to decompress it into memory before the game starts, so you have to write the compressors, the decompressors, and we're not public software at any time. You typically need to do an art tool so that you can draw pixels in the format required by that. Photoshop did not exist. Sound effects drivers, music drivers, we had to write all of that software in-house before the first game could be made. And then after that, we're all set up and we can do games for a while, but 2 years later, a new one comes out. So there was a lot of work behind the scenes that nobody ever realized of making the company capable of making games for a new console.
Can you please clarify what was your role in Activision? Was you were doing only the game design tasks, or you were involved in the decision making in some way? And maybe can you explain the publishing process in Activision? How were you choosing which game you wanted to publish?
One of the things that we learned from Atari is that only game people can decide what games to make for the Atari 2600. And a lot of that is, obviously, if you know games, you know what's going to be fun. But also, it is such a hard technical job that you also have to know what can be done on the Atari 2600. I mean, one of the problems with Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 was that the Atari 2600 was not capable of doing that kind of game and doing it well. That's why there's so much flicker. It's like you're running 4 different Atari 2600s, one every 60th of a second, you change it. And so you're using those objects multiple times and they flicker, you can't tell what's going on, that sort of thing. So we knew going into Activision that the product decisions would be made by the product department, not by marketing, not through market research. I hated at Atari when somebody said, space games are popular, do more space games. I did the opposite. I said, if space games are popular today, don't do a space game, because when your game comes out next year, people will be tired of space games, right?
Yeah.
So the design group, which was initially just the 4 of us, we made the decisions of what games could be made and made a little bit of a prototype version, and then we all met together and said, this is probably a good one, this will do it. That might never make it, let's try something else or whatever. And then Jim Levy, running the business, he had kind of a difficult decision. He had to make the business run in an organized fashion. So he would look at the business and say, I really need 2 brand new games by September of this year for my business plan to work out. And so we would all meet together and I would say, the one I'm working on will definitely be done by September of this year, ready to sell. And someone else who's farthest along would say, and this will be what you'll have. So he could go back and say, instead of saying the business plan says, I need this, he basically said, I would like to have this, can you do it? And we'd figure out if we can or not. If we couldn't, we changed the plan. But we tried to never release a game based on a schedule, because then you don't know that it's done and as fun as it can be. But we would make some commitments that, yes, by September, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to have this game fully played and fun. and you can count on that. And I'll work, 12 hours a day if I have to make sure that happens.
You know, when I was doing my research about the Activision and how things were done within the company, one thing that fascinated me about Activision games was patches. The patches not in the sense of updates and bug fixes, but physical items that the player could put on his jacket or somewhere else. If I read that Activision were giving them to the players who were sending photos with their high scores. I haven't seen anything like that. It's such an unexpected prototype of modern achievement system, and it was almost 20 years before this concept began to appear in other games. Can you tell me who came up with this brilliant idea and how many players actually bothered to send their photos to get those patches?
Well, yes, our game design team was a bunch of brilliant guys, and Jim Levy was a brilliant marketer. He had come from the record business, which is why we wanted recognition for our games, we wanted our name on the games and that sort of thing. He took it a little further, and he treated us kind of like rock stars, where you get the picture and the bio. It was somewhere between the book industry and the movie industry, but in the music industry. But that's because he came from the music industry. So his strength was marketing. And he would look around for all sorts of ways to do something like that. I'll give you an example. I finished the game Freeway. Game Freeway is 2 chickens crossing 10 lanes of traffic. We can get to the top first as many times as possible in 2 minutes, right? Well, when I was done with it, it was not a chicken. It was a man. And he was running across traffic. Because at the last trade show, I had seen a guy trying to run across 10 lanes of traffic on Lakeshore Drive on our way to CES in McCormick Place. And I said, well, there's a video game right there. And we were about to go to our January CES show. And he looked at it and he said, if you change that guy to a chicken, we can hire a person in a chicken suit to walk around the trade show and get attention for our product. And at the time, there was a famous chicken in San Diego that he tried to hire, but he was too expensive. But so one of our marketing people worked for Jim, rented a chicken suit for that. But anyway, so the game did not change, but the imagery did. I'm the expert at gameplay, so I'm not going to take suggestions from anybody but other experts in gameplay. And we would do that within the lab. But, no marketing guy is going to come to me and say, make this gameplay different. But making it look different that's what their strength is. And I was able to make a very good looking chicken. Sometimes you try to make an object on the Atari 2600 and you can't tell what it is. But the chicken looks a lot like a chicken. And I even made a sound that sort of sounds like a chicken clucking when he gets hit. So I modified the game in about 2 days. And we put a guy in a chicken suit, went to the trade show, and got a lot of promotion. And then turned it into Freeway, went to Chicken Across the Road, and all of those connections all worked very well. So that was wrapping in Jim Levy's marketing expertise at the end of the game to make the whole thing better. So anyway, but as a marketing genius, he was looking for all sorts of things, and the patches were his idea. I mean, everybody in this generation thinks Microsoft invented the achievement, and they're all digital achievements. But in fact, we used very high quality stitched patches that you could stitch onto your jacket, and they were free. If you took a picture of a game that achieved a certain score, you would mail in that photograph, and we had a customer service department that would mail you out one of those patches. And we had people come to the shows wearing jackets with every patch on them, and it was a very popular thing to do, and it was free. As for how many, we had a customer service department of 7 full-time people opening letters with photographs in them and sending out patches. in the heyday of Pitfall, we received 20,000 letters a week
Jeez.
of people with pictures and showing earning the patch.
Amazing. It looks like people really enjoyed your games and they wanted to. It was an honor to get this patch, and so they bothered to send the photograph. It was before there was an easy way to take screenshots from screens like nowadays, so they had to somehow figure it out to find. Yeah, it's amazing. It's about numbers, another thing I wanted to ask. In Activision, you knew how many copies each of your games have been sold, right? For example, I've seen numbers that Pitfall managed to maintain at the top position in charts for years and sold over 4 million copies on Atari 2600. But what about sales on home computers and other platforms? How they were comparable to the console leaders?
We always knew how many games how many cartridges each of our games sold. The awards on the wall behind me are sales records. They're just, again, because Jim Levy was from the music business, those are gold and platinum cartridges, just like you would have gold and platinum records. So it was well known how many were being sold. Now, once you reached gold or platinum, which is 1 million, there was no further award for 5 million or 4 million or whatever, but your numbers are about correct on that. In the home computer business, the numbers were much smaller. So a hit on the Atari 2600 was 500,000. A mega hit was 1 million or more. And in the home computer market, a hit was 100,000. So it was a much smaller business, a smaller market. And plus, a lot of the home computers were actually being used as computers rather than as gaming systems. So it kind of, made the market smaller from that standpoint as well.
There is a lot of talks it's still ongoing talks that it was computers is usually a platform where piracy is a huge issue. So I wanted to ask, maybe in Activision it was considered as an issue, or it was over-exaggerated in your opinion?
You'd be surprised maybe that there was piracy in the cartridge business even. Some company would buy one copy of Pitfall, and it's just a ROM, and you take the ROM, figure out what's in the ROM, which is very easy, just read the ROM, and build your own. So there were companies all over the world pirating Activision cartridges, sometimes using the exact labels and boxes. Other times, one company in, I think it was Saudi Arabia, they called themselves Otari and sold Activision's games in their own cartridges.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine something like that these days, because if they were if someone would do this now, they're going to be sued into oblivion in a few seconds.
But there were companies that we didn't really have, relationships with to sue people. And if you talk to collectors now, they love that because they can find all of those very unique pirated copies, and they're more valuable than the originals now. In the home computer business, most software was sold on floppy disks, beginning with 5 1/4-inch floppy disks and then 3 1/2-inch floppy disks. And since if you have a computer and 2 floppy disk drives, you can copy one floppy disk, put it in one, and copy it on a blank. So that was an issue that piracy could have been really, bad. So what was done was there are more tracks on a floppy disk than the disk drive on the home computer can write to.
Here, bear it back. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, okay. Brrr. Okie dokie. Oh, back to the interview.
They can read a few extra tracks that they can't write to, put it simply. So we would put special codes on those hidden tracks that made it impossible to actually duplicate a disk on your computer. It's called copy protect, and it went on all of the disks back then. So it did not stop you if you were a company
Ding,
and
baby.
you wanted to use commercial grade equipment. You could read and duplicate those tracks.
Well, let me read this stuff. Increases stun duration. Increase armor contribution from items.
As well and sell them. But if a company wants to do it, particularly in America, we could then just sue that company. So the biggest worry was just everybody with a home computer making a couple, 3, 4, 5 copies and giving them out to their friends might completely destroy the business. You know, we have to be able to sell enough games to make back the costs of making a game with a little profit. I tell the people all the time, if you look at a AAA game they spend $100 million on, and you say, I don't want to spend $60 for that game today. And I say, if you like those kinds of games, step up and pay full price, because that company needs to make a little bit of a profit or they won't make another one. So anyway, that was the concern with Copy Protect, is that if everybody with a computer in their bedroom were able to make 4 or 5 copies and sell them to other people who want the game or even give them away, it would mean we sell 1/5 as many games and the business goes away.
Let's put aside business stuff for a moment and talk about your games. Since I've already mentioned Pitfall a few times, let's start with this one, I guess. You know, I must admit that I haven't played it until recently, and I want to say that it holds up really well, and I had more fun with it than I expected. How did you come up with the concept of this game and gameplay mechanics such as an underground layer with levels that are connected in a side-scrolling manner? And why does the protagonist have the name Harry? Is there any backstory behind it?
Well, let's start with the name. Naming things is really hard. We eventually arrived at the company named Activision. We went through some really bad names before that. The best of those was Computer Hearts Inc. And the worst one was VSync, VSYNC, which is the name of a signal on the Atari 2600, actually. It's a television signal name. So eventually you end up with a name, and you think, well, what else could it have been? You know, after you've heard it a few times, it feels like it was perfectly natural, but when it first occurred to you, you can't figure out, you know, it just doesn't feel the same, and then all of a sudden it seems like it's what it should have been all along. So, Pitfall was originally Jungle Runner, but that was just a working title, because you were running in a jungle. I didn't expect that to be the name of the game on the box. But it was used so much that it almost went out of Jungle Runner, because everybody said, but it is Jungle Runner. I've been playing it for 9 months. It's Jungle Runner, right? But I like puns, plays on words, and so I came up with the name Pitfall because he falls in the pits. And I just, you know, that worked out. And now, of course, it couldn't be anything else, right? Couldn't imagine that game not being called Pitfall. And there's really no reason for Pitfall Harry's name. It sounded good. You know, when you name a dog, you look at the dog and say, you look like Harry, you know? So, anyway, so Pitfall Harry became Harry because it just sounded good. As for making the game, if you go back to the 1970s, late 70s, look at most of the games that were done. They have inanimate objects for main characters. Tanks, jet planes, biplanes, you name it, they're pretty much inanimate objects because animating a human figure in 8 pixels is very difficult to do. There are a few examples, Centauri, but mostly they were these animated, they're not inanimate objects. So I had been trying to put a smoothly animated human figure into a video game for a long time. Every time I finished a game at Activision, I would go back to trying to figure out how to make this smoothly animated character in only 8 pixels. I would walk around the lab like any animator. I would freeze in position and I would sketch the position of my arms and legs, and try all these things. And I had a really good one, but it didn't work out. I tried to do a cops and robbers game, and there weren't enough objects on the screen to make any interesting gameplay. So finally, I finished one, maybe Grand Prix, I don't know, and I said, I'm just determined I'm not going to quit until I can put a smoothly animated character into a game. So I figured out the character, Butterball Harry, got him walking on the screen, running, and the animation looked pretty good. So I sat down with a blank sheet of paper and I said, all right, I got this little running man, and I drew him in the middle of the screen, little stick figure. He's running. Where is he running? I drew a couple lines for a path. So, okay, he's running on a path. I could do that on the Atari 2600. Where is the path? So, I can probably draw some tree trunks and trees. So let's put the path in the jungle. And why is he running? Well, he's collecting stuff and running away from stuff. And that took 10 minutes, and that was the beginning of the game. And then, of course, it was 1,000 hours of programming and art, pixel art, to make it all happen. So it iterates like that. You start with a little journal idea, and then you add something, and then you add something more. I figured out what enemies he might be running from, rolling logs. The campfire looks really nice. Well, that went into the game because it looked really nice. It would have been something else if it didn't look good. So you draw these things, figure out what they can do, and as a game designer, you can see it all coming together in your mind. This is something you have to jump over, and then swinging vine was really cool. That was a technological innovation that had never been done before.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. This moment was really cool. It's just so smooth and it's really good to the gameplay mechanics. I enjoy it.
Well, the Atari 2600 is only capable of drawing 2 8-bit objects and 3 1-bit objects. And then, of course, playfield, like the trees are made out of. So that vine is a 1-bit object that is turned on at the top of the screen, and then its position is moved while the screen is being painted, so that the next time it's painted, it's slightly to the left, and slightly more to the left, and slightly more to the left. So that's actually being computed, and it's only 1 bit wide, but it can become any angle like that. Again, it's very technical, and very difficult to work on the Atari 2600. So anyway, as I'm doing this game, I said, this is a big deal. And the big deal is that when you run off the right edge of one screen, you run onto the left edge of the next screen. Now, instead of one screen games like most games are at that time, you now have infinite possibilities. If you have enough ROM in the cartridge, you can run out of the jungle into the city, and from the city, off the right edge of one screen, you run on the left edge of the next screen. Now, instead of one,
I'll have to mute the mic so I hear that echo.
you run onto a boat, and all of that capability exists, which is why 2 years later there were 600 platform games just like Pitfall, because it's so so expansive, gave you so much ability. So as I'm developing the game, I end up with 32 treasures because that happens to be a binary number of 5 bits. spread the treasures around, figure out where to place them, how to make the game challenging, and all those things. And there's enough screen space to have an underground cavern, so I do that. And I put that scorpion, that nasty scorpion down there. And he's intended to be hard to jump.
Yeah, I didn't manage yet to jump over it.
Haven't yet jumped one. Well, if you're gonna put something hard in the game, there should be a reward. And so that's why the underground passages, you move 3 screens at a time. It's a faster way to get through the maze. And in fact, I tweaked everything so carefully so that you could not finish the game in the 20-minute time limit unless you braved the scorpions and took some of the shortcuts. You didn't have to take all of them, but you at least had to take some of them in order to finish the game. And finishing the game is a big deal. It's a real accomplishment when you finish Pitfall, get all the treasures in the 20-minute time frame. So all game design is iterative. You try something and you say, yes, that looks good. You make it challenging, but also rewarding. Rob Fulop, who was one of the other old masters in video games, he had a kind of a funny quote. He said, "You want me to make the game hard? I'll make the game hard." And he said, it's an adventure game and you go into a room and there's an old man there. And the old man looks at you and he says, "I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 1,000,000. Tell me my number and you may pass." That's hard. But what's difficult in the video game business is to make it challenging and still fun. We don't have an equation for that. We don't know how to do that except to try it and say, this would be fun. I'm going to try this. This would be challenging. It's too challenging, but simplify it a little and then give them a good reward for surviving. So that's what good game design is. And Pitfall had a lot of that in there.
You've mentioned, you made an analogy when you talked about the name of Harry with analogy with the dog. So I want to talk about another game that is related to pets. I wanted to talk with you about Little Computer People. It's such an unusual game in your portfolio. I mean, most of your previous work was related to the arcade genre, but Little Computer People was more of a social simulation experiment that was way ahead of its time. It has so many cool ideas, like the moment when the character knocks on your screen and the game produces a suitable sound effect, like he really does that. Can you tell me more about the development of this game, and if it's true that each copy of the Little Computer People was unique in some way?
Well, Little Computer People has a lot of development in it, even before it came to Activision. It was a product that we acquired, and then I took over and turned into an interactive video game. A designer in LA, his name was Rich Gold, came up with this idea way back before we had any inkling of it. He wanted to do a product called Pet Person, and he was thinking in terms of pet rock. Did you ever hear about the pet rock, or was that an American thing only?
It's American, most likely it's an American thing. I haven't heard about it.
Well, the pet rock was just a marketing idea. You go out into the garden and you pick up a rock and you clean it up and you put it in a bag. And then you put a story around it and you name the rock, you tell a story about the rock, and then you sell it for $10, even though it was free. Just picked it up out of the garden. And people would then collect it and it was their pet. So it's pretty stupid, but it was a great marketing idea. The advantage of it is it had no cost, and yet with good marketing could sell at a reasonable price. So Rich's idea was to do Pet Person, which is kind of like a fishbowl, where the house that he lives in is on the screen, and the guy just lives his life. And it was intended to be completely non-interactive. The most interaction was when you would give him some food, ring the doorbell, and he'd go out and get the food and put it in his pantry or whatever. And then kind of Tamagotchi-like, you did have to periodically, make sure that there's water for him to drink, food to eat, or he would get sick and go to bed and die. So Rich Gold took that idea to an investor, got some money, went to a technical company, people I know, and they spent a long time trying to they made the house on the disc and the guy and the dog, so that part had been finished. But that was expensive. I mean, that's a lot of work in there. Making a complete simulation of life is a lot of programming. And so instead of like the Pet Rock, where it costs nothing to make and could be sold for a reasonable price, this thing cost a lot to make. And the idea of trying to sell something that had no interaction into a market where everybody was used to video games where you do something, you play. They basically were going to lose their shirts. And realized that, so they came to Activision and showed it to us. And I said, I really like what you've got so far. The simulation is really nice. There's lots of other things we might add. But I really want to make the guy intelligent. I want to make the guy interactive. I want to be able to talk to him. I want him to be able to talk to me. And I convinced Jim Levy to pay a lot of money to acquire that. And then I spent a year of my time, which was worth a lot of money, turning it into what it became. And yes, by the time I was done with it, it was a full simulation of an artificial intelligent creature. So many fun things. He could play music, he could play the piano. My favorite thing was when he would sit down and type you a letter. That it's been explained many times online, and you can find it in some, if you Google it. I figured out a way to make those paragraphs that he typed be unique every time and represent his emotional state. It represented whether he was happy or sad, whether he was hungry or full, and whether he was wanting to be patted on the head when he's sitting in his armchair. All of those things went into his emotional makeup. And so there was a simulated brain. The question as to whether or not every disc was unique is yes, absolutely. But that required a lot of technology as well. As you know, there are tracks on a 5 1/4-inch floppy that cannot be modified your own disc in your Commodore 64 or your Atari 800 or whatever. But it can be written to by the disc duplicators that we had at Activision for manufacturing the product. So working with the company that provided those disc duplicators, we had them create an advancing serial number in those tracks so that every serial number, every disc that was made had a different serial number, which is a different run, basically a random number that was different. When you started up the product, there was a house but no guy. And eventually a little computer person would walk up and he would move in. You'd look around and he'd come back and he'd move in. Well, I would take the random signature on those hidden tracks on the disc and performed an algorithm on them to determine who the guy's going to be. One of 256 names, one of so many animated heads, one of so many clothing preferences, whether he's neat or messy. He'd leave the cabinet doors open when he left. All sorts of things about his personality were derived from that seed, that random seed. And then it was it was always on the disc. So every time you ran the disc, it was that same guy. So you knew that your guy was named Jacob, and he was a messy character, and nothing you could do would change that. Then while you're playing, you could his state, his emotional state, got written out to the disc periodically, so that if you quit the game and came back, he was still in the same mood, he was still in the same, emotional state. Everything was the same about him, and that was a track that I would write to the disc.
Need help? Open for business. Looking for something specific? Help you find something? What's your problem? Knock it off. You're getting on my nerves. Greetings. Well met. King's honor, friend. You need something? I buy and trade. Open for business. What's your problem? Light be with you. Well met. Light bless you. I buy and trade. Greetings. Farewell.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be on tomorrow, and actually, I'll try to put this. Here's a link to the interview I was watching. Yeah, it's David Crane interview on PCGI YouTube channel. It's called "Working." Here, I'll just whatever. Working at Atari, founding Activision. Put that in chat just for if anyone wants to finish listening to it. Hope everyone's well. God bless you. I'll be on tomorrow. Like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.